Now, if I put you into a role of a, let's say, CEO of a medium-sized enterprise, and you say,
Mhm.
I'm actually fine. Yeah, I don't know what this discrimination or diversity thing is a fuss about. The thing is, it is a big topic for a lot of your employees. And if you, also from a very privileged position, you just put these topics aside, you give them the sign that you do not really understand them and their lived reality. And this will just lead to the fact that they will kind of distance themselves more, maybe from your products, maybe also from your work culture, yeah, a very big topic for you. And maybe they will also not invest so much of their potential and their talent.
Hello, and welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast about cooperation and conflict at work. My name is Paul Emzev, and in this episode, I spoke with Frauke Logermann. Frauke is the team leader for talent and diversity management at the Max Planck Society, one of Germany's most successful research organizations. With 31 Nobel laureates, it ranks among the world's best and most prestigious research institutions. In her job at the Max Planck Society, Frauke focuses on diversity programs, workplace discrimination, and personal development programs related to diversity management and unconscious biases. In addition to that, she also works as a trainer, coach, and mediator. With Frauke, we talked about her motivation for diversity, some of the main challenges that diversity managers face, and how to ensure a professional environment that works for everyone. My main takeaway from our conversation is that, yes, the topic of diversity is complex, but at the same time, there are quite simple things we can do. If you want to get a better understanding of why diversity matters at work, this episode is for you. Let's get the conversation started. Here's Corporate Culture with Frauke Logermann.
This topic of diversity and equality, I think, has been with me from my early childhood days. Because I
Mhm.
don't know, I've been growing up in Germany, in the western part, in the so called rural area. And this is already a place which is culturally very diverse. Yeah, so for me it was very natural that in the kindergarten, I've been playing with kids with very different cultural backgrounds, which I really learned to cherish a lot and liked a lot. But also very early on, I don't know, I recognized that somehow boys and girls had been treated differently. And one
Hmm.
thing which really set me off back then as a 5-year-old girl was um, with my dad, I went oftentimes to like a little kiosk, a little convenience store next door, and he loved to buy me like little surprise bags there, and I loved that
Mhm.
too, of course. But they had been very gendered back then already because there were surprise bags for girls and for
Mhm.
boys.
Mhm.
And of course, at first, what my dad did, he bought me the one for girls. And then, I mean, 2 or 3 times I opened them and I was like, okay, there's always something like jewelry in there, or I don't know, like little lipsticks or so. But I was like, hey, I want to have something to play with. This is not what I really want. So I
Mhm.
asked him once, yeah, can you just get me the one for boys? And I was so happy in the end because, I think there were little toys in there, like airplanes you could put together, little cars, or really something interactive.
Mhm.
And from then on, I always asked my dad to buy me the surprise bags for boys. And
Mhm.
but what stayed with me was why actually already back then, and it made me already as a little girl, it made me angry. Like, why do they put so different things into the surprise bags, and why aren't they just surprise bags for kids? Yeah. So, long story short, so I think these were my first steps to the position I am having now. And I'm a trained social scientist, and already at school, I've been always interested in questions, like equality, demographic change. And I've been starting off actually as a EU consultant, so to speak. So I'm actually trained to manage huge EU projects and also politics in a way. And this is how I actually started my career also at Max Planck. I was employed as a EU consultant and EU project manager. But then also my first steps, let's say when I went into the business world, I also realized that things were a little odd, because coming from university, I thought we, as a let's say white, more privileged women also in some senses, that we live in a very equalized world. So I did not think a lot about gender equality also throughout my studies, because it was really equal. But then I stepped into the work world, and I realized, hey, how can it be that so many of my women colleagues, highly qualified with doctorates, are in half-time position and are not representing leadership? And so with that knowledge, actually, then I also became a gender equality officer at my institute back then, because let's say also in the midst of 2015, diversity management or diversity positions were not really present yet, also especially in Germany. So I started off as gender equality officer. And then though, when a position was opened at the headquarters of the Max Planck Society back in 2018 on diversity management, I kind of applied with that gender equality background and my social scientist background. And this were also actually my first steps into the professionalized fields of diversity management, because oftentimes also, the things that you are doing in the fields for equality, they are, let's say, on top, they're voluntary work. And that you also can make money with work like that, anti-discrimination, diversity work, that had just simply not been in place very broadly back then when I also started my studies.
Yeah. And I hope now you can buy the surprise bags that you like yourself.
Yes, of course. Well, no, unfortunately, the surprise eggs, the Kinder eggs, I see, you have the girls' eggs. I sometimes buy them and just to see what's in there, and it's kind of similar still. I'm
Okay.
not satisfied yet.
Okay. Still some
Yeah,
work to do.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned already some aspects of diversity. I think you talked about your childhood with like other children from different backgrounds. You talked about the boys and girls observation that you had in your childhood and later on. But I feel like when we talk about diversity, it's such a big term, and
yeah.
my impression is that many people they don't actually know what it all includes. So is it just a man and woman thing? Is it a cultural topic? What
Yeah.
do we actually mean when we talk about diversity?
Yeah, Paul, this is also a very good question, actually, because this is actually oftentimes the hassle that we have with, let's say, the term diversity, because oftentimes also when, for example, I'm also talking to colleagues or different scientific institutions, I'm also asking them, okay, what do you understand or what do you prioritize under diversity? Because we oftentimes tend to have a very different understanding or prioritization in relation to the term. So, just really practically speaking, especially at, let's say, strict diversity management, you describe basically the support also, let's say, of minorities or underrepresented groups, oftentimes related to gender, to ethnicity, to age, to social orientation, religion, for example, but it can also be way broader. For example, these are more like, say, sometimes visible traits, but also to see diversity regarding different points of perspective, levels of education, socioeconomic background. And what we also do see is that when you also take a look around the world, that diversity, let's say, trends and policies are often dominated also by slightly different priorities. In the US, for example, the diversity, let's say, programs that you see there, I have to say now, had been a little, because that there had been a lot of political change over the last years, but had been predominantly also focusing on topics such as racism, ethnic minorities, because simply diversity came out of the social rights movement out of the 60s, mostly also advocating for the rights of people of color, Affirmation Acts and so forth. So when in the US, you also look at universities as organization, oftentimes diversity debates had been about gender, but predominantly about terms like ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, religion, and race, so to speak. When we look at Germany, for example, or also Europe, there, the diversity policies or the programs that we see, they're mostly more concentrated on gender equality. And I talk about binary gender equality, so equality between men and women, and especially also equality regarding, positions of power, in leadership and so forth. But actually, also, again, if you address someone and somebody's telling you about, I want to foster diversity, I would always advise to just ask them back, okay, what do you understand under diversity?
Mhm.
What is your priority? Or what? And
Mhm.
oftentimes, also, what you see is that mostly, I mean, this is also a question if this is good or bad, but mostly there's a personal relation also to a diversity dimension they're advocating for. And this is also a question by itself. Does it have to be like that? In an ideal world, it wouldn't have been. So, society as such would have the goal to move forward there. But yeah, in general, there's a very broad definition of diversity
Mhm.
out there.
Mhm.
But of course, there are also different laws, of course. You could also refer to like the Gender Equal Treatment Act in Germany, yeah, which really defines that you as an organization, you may not discriminate based on gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and so forth. But it can mean way more.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it makes sense to see that diversity programs, they will focus on the big challenges, like as you say, in the US maybe racial
Yeah,
inequality, and maybe here in Europe mostly gender inequality at work, but of course also other inequalities that exist. um,
exactly.
I'm still wondering, so we talked about this before, that at least I observed that many diversity managers often are women,
Yeah.
or are maybe gay people, or are people who are really affected by also
Mhm.
the fight for equality, which I think really
Mhm.
makes sense. And where I
Mhm.
also understand, of course, that part of the motivation is also the experience that you had
Yeah.
yourself, maybe also in those inequalities. Um, I'm wondering, what would a person like me, for example, like, so I'm a white, rather young man who didn't face a lot of the inequality problems, if I was very egoistic, let's say,
Mhm.
why should I care about diversity? Like, if it's not for myself, do you have arguments for people who are not that affected to still care about that topic?
Mhm. Yeah, actually, the thing is actually, what society do you want to live in?
Mm,
Yeah. And at the moment, we just have to face the fact that we do not live in an equal world, societies, and that discrimination is with a lot of people in our society every day. And this has oftentimes an impact, for example, on the fact of people being satisfied or dissatisfied in our society. Yeah. Or also, maybe, for example, let's say, now, if I put you into a role of a, let's say, CEO of a medium-sized enterprise, and you say,
mhm,
I'm actually fine. Yeah, I don't know what this discrimination or diversity thing is a fuss about. The thing is, it is a big topic for a lot of your employees. And if you also from a very privileged position, you just put these topics aside, you give them the sign that you do not really understand them and their lived reality. And this will just lead to the fact that they will kind of distance themselves more, maybe from your products, maybe also from your work
mhm,
culture. Yeah, a very big topic for you. And maybe they will also not invest so much of their potential and their talent into, let's say, your company and the product development. And so, just from also, let's say, this perspective as such, it should be a very big interest for you, even though you might not be affected right away. Or, for example, if you talk
mhm,
about the fact that a lot of women at the moment are still not able, or mothers especially, to work as many hours as they want to, because still, especially in Germany, for example, the burden for caring for the children is still more on the shoulders of the women or the mothers. Yeah. So
mhm,
all
mhm,
these diversity questions, they are incremental topics of economic growth, and also in the end, democratic glue. Yeah,
mhm,
because I personally, if I also look at the political situation we have also in our societies, also especially, I think that if a more, let's say, awareness and understanding for the different needs within our society would have been brought forward, we would have a lot of more people being more engaged into defending our democratic values, because you really have the feeling that my interests are being represented and heard. Yeah. And I think we would be living in a way more prosperous society as well.
Hmm.
Because the tricky thing at the moment is we don't have a let's say, counter case so much. We know what the reality is these days, and it's not equal. It's full of discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, in some parts it's going well. But then I can hardly, of course, show, a case. I mean, we have a lot of studies, showing that no matter in economy or in science, if you have more diverse teams, equal representation of gender, ethnic diversity, a socioeconomic background, the product or let's say the product output will be better, the level of innovation grows, your team is more flexible, so the data is all there. Still, at the very beginning, it means just more work aligning your team with these different needs and perspectives, and it's a bigger challenge for leadership. And it
Yeah.
needs putting in more work. And this is where it often stops already. And this is why we often don't cross, let's say, this bench where you really see the potential and the benefits of diversity unfolding.
Hmm.
Yeah. And this is just the thing. But in a way, I mean, I always ask myself, I mean, also, let's say, as a white man, don't I want that, let's say, um, and I live in a society where people can really follow, let's say, their talents, their potential, their needs. And also I, as a man, for example, can also question the stereotypes that are related to my position. I mean, I guess also for you, Paul, I mean, maybe you have been growing up with some I guess you have been growing up with some stereotypes about how a man has to be.
Hmm.
Yeah. Maybe probably, yeah, being the main breadwinner, maybe I just guess, I don't know, maybe showing feelings in some way can be seen as rather weak or critical. And this is, though it's just human nature. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think if we, like, say, broaden up the discussion about these underlying stereotypes about gender or let's different ethnicities in general, everyone can profit from it.
Hmm.
And this is what I would tell you as a white man, so to
Hmm.
speak, why there should be
Yeah.
something in for you.
Yeah, yeah, it makes, I think it makes perfect sense. So what you're saying basically is also that it's maybe a bit short-sighted to not care about diversity if I'm not affected myself. So I can,
Exactly.
it's maybe not even in my own interest to care about it, even if I'm maybe not directly affected by inequality myself.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
because you are indirectly, you are affected. Yeah.
Hmm.
Or also, no matter, I mean, I don't know if you're also in a relationship, of course, let's say heteronormative or so, these topics of equality, they always play a role within your relationship dynamics
Yeah,
as well. Or the
yeah.
question, how you govern your household or who's the main breadwinner and so forth. So they're all there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, true.
Mhm.
Um, And still, I find it very interesting to look a bit deeper into those different views on diversity, because I feel that
Yeah.
even within the people who are in favor of diversity, I feel that there are
Yes.
different views on diversity. For
Yes.
example, I personally have a good friend who is a strong feminist and
Hmm.
who is, for example, in a, so not in a real fight, of course, but in a intellectual fight, for example, with transgender activists when it comes to women's rights.
I see.
And,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
for example, these kind of things where within inequalities, there is again a kind of discussion on what counts more or less or what is more important. Do you have any
Hmm.
views on that? How to realign those like diverse views on diversity, let's say?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very big pain point also of me professionally, but also personally, I
Mm,
have to admit. And I think this is also, unfortunately, from my perspective, one of the reasons why also in some questions of equality, we did not never come as far as we could, because it's exactly like you say, also within, let's say, the advocates for diversity, there's also, let's say, a fight for power. Yeah.
hmm.
And what I also see is that, for example, if we now take feminism, also especially in Europe, feminism has historically been rather dominated by white feminists. So, a lot of, we call it, like in scientific terms, we call it intersectionality, meaning that, you take also one category of discrimination, now take gender, and you see there also, I mean, there's not the woman. Yeah, there's a lot of, women are very different, and they also are being brought up in different, let's say, circumstances with different privileges. And that you have to account for that within the group of women, additional discrimination is taking place. Yeah, or that due to this intersecting let's say, dimensions of discrimination, like, for example, ethnicity or disability, also queerness, women, there's also a kind of discrimination scale within the group of women. So my experiences as a white woman are way different than the experiences of a woman of color. Yeah. And also within these groups, unfortunately, that advocate for equality, there also discrimination does take place. Yeah. But this is something, of course, we have to openly discuss. Yeah. And which is a danger also, because also let's say for me as a diversity manager, I sometimes have the situation that when I, for example, try to maybe talk with the advocates of different groups about taking additional intersectional diversity aspects on board, they have the feeling, oh no, if we do that, then maybe some of the attention that is being focused on my main topic, yeah, will be drawn back. And this is why I don't go that way. And I think this is actually, I have to admit, I think this is a mistake. Yeah, because I think actually if all these groups would really come together and really advocate for structural equity and a reform, of processes and let's say systems, we would make a better, the cake would not get smaller. Yeah, but they would be able to move forward quicker. And talking about this, of course, the debate of, let's say, feminists also being more critical of transgender movements, or saying, like, sometimes even, criticizing that they might not be the women they would like to represent. I find that a very dangerous line to go. Yeah, because who are you then to divine who is a woman? Yeah, and you do actually kind of, I'm very upfront here, you kind of put again outer, let's say, interpretation of their gender from the outside, which is a basic criticism of the patriarchy, which is being done, to women, that the patriarchy tells you how woman has to be, how they have to look like, how they have to act, and so forth. So I think actually that my wish would be more openness, and really also, let's say, the things they advocate for singularly, being listened to, by reflecting on discrimination, to also do that within their own communities, and then move forward and really say, hey, we want to have a change for the better for everyone. Yeah. And this also, of course, oftentimes, unfortunately, this argument is then also taken on by, let's say, just in general, so opponents of diversity, because you say, the same things that they're criticizing, they're just doing this themselves. Yeah. And this is a danger, I think. Yeah. And but it is there, and of course, this is just a thing. It's not like that just because it's good, of course, if you're an activist or if you're kind of advocating for equality, you have a certain level of awareness, of course, but it doesn't mean that you're not discriminating yourself against other groups. Yeah, so discrimination is there present as well.
Yeah. And would you say that this is maybe also a reason why diversity is maybe not as popular everywhere, because it's so complex? Because I feel the more I talk about it, the more I also myself understand it, the more I realize how nuanced and how many facets it has. And so it's not so easy to grasp. And I'm wondering, maybe that's also a reason for people who are maybe also not affected to maybe become more defensive, because it's say, if I open this kind of Pandora's box, there's so much I don't understand.
Or maybe so many, let's say, let's say, words that I may not say, and that I maybe will get, let's say, criticized for, and I can go that line down with you, maybe to say, let's say maybe the discussion about diversity back, let's say, back in the years, had been very highly scientifically approached. So you had the feeling you have to be very, very deep sometimes in the topic to just be able to talk about it. But in general, I have to say, if you really just break it down, it's really just about listening to the experiences of different people, of different groups, and just taking people seriously when they're saying, hey, something's wrong, I do feel discriminated, or I'm not treated equally. That's it. And I would hope so, that we could find common ground on this, everyone, that every one of us wants to be treated, let's say, equally and with respect. and being listened to. And this is actually what it's all about. Because the thing is also, maybe in the past, diversity had been very much also focused on taking a look at the numbers, how many women are represented, how many different ethnicities are present, how many people with disability are there. But actually, in the end, diversity is really about the culture.
Mm.
Yeah, how we interact with each other. Yeah, how we also really make room for different perspectives, even if they may not pose the majority. And this is very, very crucial. Yeah, because, for example, you can have a very nice quantitative diversity report listing all the different dimensions I quoted, like, which makes it so complex: age, ethnicity, disability. But the real question should be, how do these people feel? Do they
Mm.
really feel respected? Do they really feel seen? Do they feel that their different needs are being seen? Or is it more like a tick in the box saying, oh yeah, but we are now much more diverse. Yeah, on the paper, but
Mm.
what about the culture?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I also have this feeling that I mean, often still it's the majority of maybe less diverse or
Yeah.
non-diverse people. They might, or some of them might have the feeling to be actually left out. So maybe
Yeah.
it's a minority also. I mean, I think it is a minority of people who think so, but there are people from the majority, let's say, who feel
Yes.
that because of the attention to the minorities, they are left out.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I have to say, I think this is just a misconception. Yeah,
Mm.
so it's never about, let's say, they're not listening anymore to the majority. Yeah, just the thing is, of course, and that this is what I can relate to, is that sometimes maybe in the past, some of the demands might have been a little too harsh, maybe, or perceivably too quick. Yeah, or that maybe some people had feeling that, due to just what I can also understand, that a lot of pain is kind of has been building up in people who have been discriminated against for generations all their life, and they now, I mean, which is also good, yeah, had the possibility oftentimes to advocate, or just let's say speak out that pain. Yeah, and say, hey, it's just, we are just living, let's say, not in a very, in an not in an equal world. And of course, oftentimes then people might just feel personally attacked, because maybe unconsciously also they think, well, if I open up that discussion, maybe my way to the top might be devalued.
Mm.
Yeah, so that maybe do, because if you, of course, will ask people in the higher leadership ranks, they will always tell you, everything I did to come here has been due to my own doing, to my own oftentimes excellence and so forth. Yeah, and maybe it's hard. Also, it takes a lot of self reflection, maybe, or also, let's say, self assurance, self confidence, to maybe admit and look at deeper. Yeah, maybe I was just as good as my colleague back in school, but I had different access to networks, resources, or just the fact that maybe I'm a tall man, and people just trust me more just based on these characteristics than maybe a woman, a smaller woman,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
example. Yeah, and I think this is just the biggest obstacle, oftentimes holding people back, because sometimes they're afraid to maybe just reflect, or that maybe their own journey is being devalued, and it's never about that. Also talking about privilege, it's never about feeling bad for one's own history, which you cannot influence. It's just about reflecting, and then maybe saying, okay, but what doors might I be able now to open for other people based out of my position of power? Or what good could I do maybe for the system to make it better and to move forward? Because this is in the end what diversity management is all about. It's about organizational development, about
Mm.
moving forward, reflecting, on our routines, how we hire people, how we evaluate people, who do we promote, on what basis. Yeah,
Mm.
what means respect in our I mean, every I guess code of conduct has in it that we want to respect each other, treat each other equally, but what does that mean in our everyday practice? Yeah, and to see how to do that. Yeah.
Mhm. Mm.
And yeah, but I think oftentimes it's simply fear also. And I think also maybe in the past we did also maybe the movements, and maybe also including myself, I've underestimated that. And maybe there should have been more effort also being put in, also listening to those majority groups and really digging in deeper into their feelings. Why is there this resistance? And is it just because they're just don't want to, or maybe is it because also there are some really well justified feeling attached to it, like
Mm-hmm.
fear, anger, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recently watched this documentary about, I think it's called Manosphere or something. Maybe you've seen it as well,
Mm-hmm.
which I found quite scary to watch. But it shows a bit these kind of counter movements also in among males who,
Yeah.
exactly like you described, they feel left out and they become really extreme in the other way around.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and I'm wondering if there's any way to kind of integrate also the skeptical people, maybe not the extreme ones who are completely, on the
Yeah.
outer spectrum, but those who are maybe skeptical or critical, to still find a way to not make them feel left out.
Yes.
Is that a part of the considerations also in your work, or how do you approach this? I think big challenge.
Yeah. Let's say it's becoming more and more part of my work, because this is exactly what we see. We see in our, also in my diversity work, let's say in the trainings and the events that we're hosting, it's still, I mean, people are coming. There is a huge community being active, also pushing these topics. But we see that we do not reach a certain groups of people. Yeah,
Mhm,
especially also I have to admit that people who are not maybe directly affected, and also men. Yeah,
mhm,
and I'm asking myself also currently a lot, how do we change that narrative, and how do we get also especially more men into, let's say, the interest for diversity projects or work? And maybe we have to work with different titles and names also, about maybe also making it more about how to work together in a, let's say, respectful manner, yeah, or how to balance, let's say, work and life, yeah, so maybe also more work into that direction, yeah. But I think what is really a big thing at the moment is that, let's say, when we're not looking at this diversity developments, and also, let's say, about take a look at feminism, we see also that a lot of younger women, and we see that also globally, we see that also a lot in Asia, but also in Europe, for example, a lot of the younger women also, they move more left, so to speak, politically, or they themselves, they reflect a lot on gender equality, that they want to have, of course, the same chances, same rights, and so forth. But on the other hand, we do not have really, let's say, and so the role of a woman, or the different roles a woman can take on, developed a lot over the
mhm,
last 30 to 40 years, whilst, let's say, different alternatives, role models for men in our societies, they're not that many, it seems. Yeah, so I recently talked to one of like a scientist on a conference, a man, a postdoc, and he was like really like saying, yeah, I would really like to have different role models, also somebody to turn to, because when I look at social media, I have all the, let's say, toxic masculinity everywhere, the fitness influencer, where it's all about how do I look, how to be a man, and also more, also unfortunately a lot of, let's say, yes, statements that are highly sexist, yeah, for objectifying women again. And then I asked him, yeah, but can't you come up with any role model that you would have, let's say, like a man or a male model? And he was like thinking, and like, well, actually, Aragon maybe, from the Lord of the Rings, but he couldn't name anyone else. And I think
mhm,
this is a strategy, and I think this is what we're at the moment unfortunately lacking. And maybe coming back to one of your questions before, um, like where you ask, how do we get more also men on board, or why should they be interested in that? I mean, I would hope, I mean, I think also in order, for society to stick together, also, let's say, the male society should maybe also question, do we really want to move on, with
mhm,
these stereotypes about how to be a man and all these qualities, or do we also want to have a change there? And do we take the chance now that there's room for change and discussion?
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
But how to do that? I have to admit, this is one of the big challenges we have currently. I cannot tell you at
Mhm.
the moment. Yeah, so if you have a good guess, please let me know. Yeah. I mean, there are huge, let's say now, networks and also campaigns about male allyship and so forth.
Mhm.
But there also the risk is oftentimes, of course, that maybe then men go public, of course, advocating for equality and feminism. But then the weird thing that it should be about is then a change of behavior. Do they really also make room, then for women or for other minorities? And this is what I cannot tell you at the moment, that let's say if these male allyship programs are very effective, or if then more men
Mhm.
really also, for example, stand up, in a room full of colleagues where maybe a joke or a sexist joke is being made about a women colleague. Yeah, if they really step up, then I don't know. But maybe the question would be to you also, Paul. Do you see a change there in this regard in your community?
Mm. So I have the feeling that there are definitely some men who are motivated by altruistic motives, who really,
Yeah,
they want to support minorities, they want to support women, they want to support fight against inequalities. But I also had the feeling that in the last years, there was also a bit of a change in public dynamics, public opinions, I think,
mm-hmm.
around that topic. And my personal feeling is that a couple of years ago, many men were, especially in the academic sphere, many men were openly, supporting that.
Yeah,
But it was also for their own public image because it was kind of cool
yeah,
also, to be
I
an
see.
ally and so on.
Yeah,
And I feel that now also, once the price, maybe in some aspects, yeah, has risen a bit for me as a man to speak up,
yeah,
I feel that voices get a little bit less. So
that's
I think
interesting. Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
maybe as you said before, the more effective way is to go through the self-interest. So, for example, to be aware or to become aware as a man that many of those stereotypes are actually harmful for ourselves. So our own
Exactly.
lives might become better actually by questioning the stereotypes. Um, and my feeling is that when the price gets really high to act for other people, there
Mm,
are very few people who are really able and willing to do it completely out of altruistic motives. I think they
yes.
exist, but I think there's also a lot to ask from people to do that. And if I'm really honest, even myself, of course, I always have to make decisions on, what am I willing to say publicly? How much am I willing to, sacrifice for
Yes.
for something else? And I think in the end, I work a bit like everyone. That of course, I think also, or in the trade-off, I think also, of course, about my own interests. Um,
Of course.
so, uh, but I think that what you said before really, I mean, it really resonated with me to say. In the end, even the ones in a majority or the men, for example, in the gender debates, have actually quite a lot of advantages to support it, and it's not only a sacrifice to do.
Yes. But I mean, I really like what you just said, that maybe in the past few years, it had been rather cool, yeah,
Hmm.
to be pro diversity and I don't know, to say out loud, I'm a feminist, yeah. But the thing is, and this is also, I have to say personally, what I felt changed. When I got my position as a diversity manager, it was like on the upscale,
Hmm.
it was
Hmm.
cool to be a
Hmm.
diversity manager.
Yeah.
It was even sometimes, I mean, diversity, it was better to use the term diversity than anti-discrimination policy, because who wants to talk about discrimination? We want to talk about
Hmm.
diversity. It's so great and confetti everywhere. Yeah. But in the end, this is unfortunately not what it's about. It's really about
Hmm.
the hard things, questioning the routines and really getting deeper into the topics. How do we distribute power also? And it's of course always easy to advocate for these things if there's a lot of support. But this is, let's say, also, or what would be my call out, maybe also to all your podcast listeners now
Hmm.
it counts, and now also, maybe also, let's say in 10, 20, 30 years, when you might talk to your friends back, or let's say your nephews or whatever, or your children, and they ask you, okay, what did you do back then, to drive these topics? If you can really reflect on that question, say, yeah, I did everything I could because I thought it brings us as a society further. Yeah.
Hmm.
And And this is what I also just want to, or let's say, or shout out for all of my colleagues out there, also in diversity management. It is a tough job because, let's say, the reputation sometimes has changed, and let's say the mental stress and mental load in this position has increased.
Mm.
Yeah, because there's a lot of more resistance these days, and a lot of arguments that I hope we had overcome. They're back there. Yeah. But this is the question. I mean, maybe also historically, there's always a back and forth, back and forth. But
Mhm.
we all have a say in the society and some layer of influence in our group of friends or at work to have an influence. Also, maybe not outspoken, but silently as well. Yeah. And maybe also, let's say, not talking about if one says one wants not to be a very outspoken advocate, you can still, I mean, when you're hiring someone, just silently have an equalized talent pool, or just invite the equal number of men and women, for example,
Mhm.
for a position in the interviews. Yeah, or to just say, hey, we need intercultural training or whatever, or I want to speak openly about what respect means to us. So you can also do little things, let's say undercover, without having to, let's say, sway the flag all the time. Yeah, but in the end,
Yeah.
we need people, of course, not only the diversity managers to step out, because yeah, it's
Mm.
a job for all of us.
Yeah. And now we were thinking, I think, mostly about voluntary support, so how to make
Yeah.
people want to contribute and want to support. And I guess, like as everything in society, there might also be some laws and some,
Yeah.
just forceful mechanisms to not allow certain things to happen. I think that's
Mhm.
also good in some ways. Um, and generally, I would be curious to hear your opinion on this trade-off of diversity and freedom. So, will diversity also, in some areas, restrict our freedoms? So, because of diversity, we are maybe less
Mhm.
free to do certain things that we had
Mhm.
the freedom to do before, or
Mhm.
are these two things not really related for you?
Well, I would just always, I mean, say that diversity is a strong driver of freedom, and really freedom for all,
Hmm.
and not freedom for a particular group. Yeah,
Hmm.
a homogeneous group. Yeah, of course. And this is just the thing, where we have to, when we take a look at, especially, let's say, the positions of power in our society, there's a rather homogeneous group, maybe still present. Yeah, and for them, I mean, sometimes these, let's say, regulations, like we also have to in Germany, or let's say also we have to have a gender equality plan, that you have to lay open, your gender quotas on specific, let's say, levels, or the, let's say, salary transparency act, that you now have to openly show, how much do you pay a person, for a job. That it might be at first seem as a, let's say, um, cutting down of your freedom, but it's just, in fact, it's about transparency. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's about progress forward. Yeah, and I would say actually it's the opposite. The more diversity we really have, and the more we have a transparent, let's say, work culture in our society, and the more we listen also to the different needs, yeah, the more we really live that freedom.
Hmm.
Because this is exactly for me personally, the difference between equity and equality. If you talk about equal opportunities, you
Hmm.
still say, everybody has an opportunity to, of course, everybody has the opportunity to become chancellor of Germany in general. Yeah. But when we look very realistically, what you need, what networks you need, maybe what advocacy you need, it's not equal. Yeah.
Hmm.
And this is the thing we have to really, really talk about. So also, if oftentimes people say, yeah, but diversity affects our freedom. No, it does not. It just really reflects on maybe really how transparent and fair our processes, and this freedom you might be talking about has not been a reality for a lot of people in society for a long time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I personally think, or let's say diversity, I mean, without also diversity, or a stronger, let's say, development or advocacy for diversity, this is a high value also, especially of our democratic systems. Yeah, and if we cut down on that, this is a big danger.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think these voices that equalize diversity with a cutting down of freedom, in the end, what they want to do, they want to shut these voices down, and they
Mhm.
want to install again the power for the powerful homogeneous majority.
Mhm. Mhm. And you mentioned also before this phenomenon that some people maybe are afraid on what they are allowed to say and what not, and
Mhm.
maybe some people feel kind of restriction of freedom, say I cannot say my opinion anymore, and I cannot say what I think anymore,
Yes.
which is probably true because yeah, I think freedom of speech is of course a high value, but it is not unlimited, right? As we all know.
Of
Um,
course.
and that brings me to a more practical question because,
Mhm.
for example, at the workplace, when we see
Yeah.
things which we think are maybe not really okay,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, at what point would you say is it useful and also maybe necessary in a professional context to speak up and maybe to criticize your colleagues or to say, that's not
Yes.
okay to do or not okay to say. In
Yeah.
this context of, this sometimes called, language police or moral police, that people actually
Yeah.
complain of being criticized. But so when is the threshold when I should actually still criticize someone?
Yeah. All right. So of course, there's not the one answer to that
Mhm.
because it also depends a little on the situation. In general, though, I mean, what one really can say, or what I can say is out of practice is, of course, if somebody maybe says like a word that might be also read rather problematic in a sense of a sexist comment or or a comment in relation to racism or discriminatory. Of course, there's a difference also in maybe the acceptance of the feedback from an opponent. If I just say, hey, how could you say that? This is racist. Or if I
Mhm.
maybe, of course, work with a question like, sorry, what did you say? Did I get that right? Or just, use all these, let's say, techniques that we have, in, let's say, yeah, communication, mediative communication
Mhm.
also as well. Yeah. So, but this is in general. I mean, also if you talk about good rules of feedback, we just know also from, let's say, how our nervous system works that if we directly attack a person, they might not really be keen on really also understanding what we want to address at. So this is always. I mean, you can always work with. If you feel like, say, there was a comment that or maybe that was not okay, just to ask, hey, sorry, did I get that right, or could you elaborate on that? And then also oftentimes people get a little feel already, maybe there was something odd, but they don't feel really being put on a spot, so to
Mhm.
speak. Yeah.
Mhm.
But what I would really also not recommend is the so-called, let's say, playing the hero in a sense. So also this, because this can also be sometimes being interpreted as being patronizing. Let's say if there was a sexist comment and to your female colleague next to you, and you're just like, oh, you cannot say that, and you like kind of protect
Mhm.
her against that comment. So this can also not be productive. Yeah. But there are little, let's say, just little techniques that you can use, questioning, or maybe also aside at the coffee, saying, yeah, that's just stuck in my mind. Could you elaborate on that further? Or maybe just approach also the person, who maybe was confronted with that comment, to say, hey, are you okay? But without
Mhm.
implying directly that you have to act on their behalf.
Mhm.
Yeah? These are the things. But maybe
Mhm.
coming back also to, let's say, the perceived narrowing down of the freedom of speech. Well, this is also, let's say, a little tricky because there is freedom of speech. The thing is just, I mean, there's no right to not being contradicted.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think this is what a lot of people have not been used to. That
Mhm.
suddenly maybe something, yeah, they have been, let's say, a term they have been growing up with, that was always normal, now it's being questioned. But I also have to say, this is just, let's say, historical development. I mean, we're also talking not nowadays like 100 or 200 years before. We're always progressing as a society, and this is one point of a progress. And maybe we just also maybe individually have to just reflect on the fact, like, how do we also nurture a good feedback culture, in our society? How do we handle actually feedback? And it's often really feedback, it's not criticism, but how do we handle that individually? And how did we where did this go wrong? Also, that it's very hard sometimes to just also give feedback to a person because they take it directly, let's say, seriously, and maybe are not open, to the main
Mm,
point. Yeah. But
mhm, mhm,
oftentimes I have to admit also the thing is that all the topics about diversity and let's say on equality, we all have, let's say, oftentimes a very personal relation to the topics. And this is why oftentimes I think this is one of the major reasons why oftentimes feedback on these particular topics, it's trickier to maybe also accept than on other topics, like on how to handle the dishwasher
yeah,
correctly.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's yeah, because we all have an opinion on what is right
mhm,
and what is wrong. And I also say that we all want to, I think intrinsically, the great majority of people wants to be fair and
mm,
respectful. And then, of course, if I maybe say, hey, this was a sexist comment, then I put you directly sometimes also maybe in an identity crisis because it's like, hey, no, I don't want to be that. I'm not that. And this is then
mhm,
why people might also be putting back. But we have to
yeah,
just find the balance here. We have to address certain things and have to overcome certain terms. But maybe it's the question why.
mm, mhm,
How? Sorry, not why. How? It's the heat. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it really makes sense to me. I
Mm.
also feel that often, especially when it comes to feedback on these kind of issues, maybe one reason why feedback is not well taken is because you don't assume a positive intention. So, for example, maybe you said something wrong, and I might give you feedback, but still assuming that you have a positive intention that I might have, misunderstood, which I think quite often is actually the case, or which has been, articulated in the wrong way. But there is, I would say, from a systemic perspective, probably a good reason for most behaviors, right? So from the person's
Mm.
perspective, most behavior of that person make real sense
True.
for that person. But for me, it's such a complicated question because I really want to try to assume positive intention always, but
Yeah.
sometimes I'm quite struggling with doing that because the because the maybe injustice or the problematic statement is so obvious, and
Yeah.
so that's what makes it for me very hard to do that. But I agree with you that probably it's if I were to accept feedback, I think it had to come from a person that assumes positive intent on my side. Because if I feel that person, even with if it's a question, did I understand you correctly? But I
Yeah.
feel that person thinks I'm a bad person or I'm a immoral guy. I would I would very much struggle to accept any kind of feedback. Probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we have the problem, let's say, also sometimes of this double burden or double bias that unfortunately often time, like say people who are then calling out a sexist comment, for example, are women. And
Hmm.
then oftentimes still also, let's say, maybe this intention or assumptions in the room, yeah, maybe it's not in a way objective because the person is like kind of emotionally attached. So also, for
Hmm.
example, this is why we need also allies, also allies not only speaking up for maybe the topics they are directly aligned to personally, but others. Because, for example, if a male colleague would maybe address you, also approach you saying, hey, I think that how did you mean that comment there? Why did you again assign Sarah with the protocol? Didn't we discuss that she should have a more, let's say, powerful role in our next project? That maybe you would also perceive this feedback differently than if a woman would approach you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So this is why it's a little tricky. Oftentimes, if it's also only oftentimes this feedback then comes from the person being affected, it's then
Hmm.
also unfortunately oftentimes not being well perceived.
Yeah.
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 So this is, yeah, but in general, I think we just have to, I mean, things have to be addressed. Maybe it's just sometimes we maybe have to think really to address them maybe in a sometimes less opposing tone. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I also have to admit for myself, I also had to work on myself a lot in that regard. Just 3 or 4 years ago, I mean, in Germany, we have the so-called gender star. Yeah, to gender non-binary, include also diverse people and so
Hmm.
forth. And for me, it was a complete also, let's say, hurting of my own values if people would just not do it. And
Hmm.
I could feel physical pain. Yeah, if people
Hmm.
weren't doing it.
Hmm.
And I would maybe jump to the assumption that they're just not interested in the topic. Just not interested in treating people fairly.
Hmm.
But this is also too simple. I had to realize. Yeah. And now these days, I mean, I engage in a discussion with these people, but I also come to the assumption, okay, if they just don't want to do it, then it's also their decision. I mean, they have to be aware maybe that for a certain group of people, they send a certain signal, but that's okay. But on the other hand, I also don't want them then telling me, you gendering with a gender star, that's stupid, or I want to forbid
Hmm.
that. So this is what I would love to come at in our society, that we have respect for each other and listen to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And move forward. And
Hmm.
this is unfortunately, I think, something that we, yeah, still have to work on. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. It reminds me of some of the events I was moderating a couple of years ago, also in Germany.
Mhm.
What you mentioned about the gender language discussion that I think was very, very present a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember, I moderated these very big town hall meetings, like in a big room with a couple of hundred people. And for me, it was really challenging to use the right words because,
Yeah.
and I experimented a lot with it. So um, I at first I started gendering a lot, so using gender language, and I
Hmm.
could see in the audience several people rolling their eyes because they were really not liking me doing that.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Did you use the gender star or like the pause?
Exactly. So
Mhm.
yeah. So with the pause and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
including always both genders, and I could
Hmm.
really see some people were really disliking me for doing that.
Wow.
But
Okay.
then I
Yeah.
also realized sometimes it was a heated debate. It was usually conflicts. Sometimes I forgot about it, and then there were
Hmm.
other people looking at me very attentively because I forgot to say the
Yep.
other gender,
Yep.
and for me,
Yeah.
it made it really hard to do my job because I felt like whatever I did, some part of society really
Exactly.
dislikes me for talking like that.
But I think this is a great example, right point. You have to just listen to yourself. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
How do you want to be perceived? What signal do you want to send? And we just know, of course, with our language, we are framing, let's say, context a lot. Yeah. And I mean, this is why we have language and why we have different words, to express different things. But I think we have to just make our own decision how we want to
Mm.
proceed with
Yeah.
that. And I think this is just a realization. You cannot satisfy everyone, unfortunately, but you have to decide how you want to approach, this topic. But also, of course, in a way, have tolerance with yourself. Then we cannot. Uh, yeah, we cannot do everything maybe right, or sometimes also up to the standard what we want to do. But you're completely right. It's a very heated topic, and it's very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can also tell you that also personally, professionally, because this topic has been with me a long time and has also taken up a lot of my time at work. I sometimes also wish that maybe I mean, it's a very important topic, but maybe I would love to talk about different topics instead. Yeah.
Mm.
So really about the topic of work culture. How do we really listen to each other? How do we listen to the different needs of people? How do we walk the talk, so to speak,
Yeah.
to really have an inclusive setting and to have more energy, be putting more energy on that than getting
Hmm.
deeply into these fights about
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
genders in what way.
Yeah. I feel the same. Yeah. Maybe as a last question, I'm sure there are a lot of people listening. I mean, those who are listening until the end are usually ones interested in that topic. So I'm sure you have a lot of fans and supporters of your cause already. But I'm thinking about those who are still listening, but are still maybe not that involved, or it's a new topic
Yeah.
for them, or they're not really, as we said before, apparently not affected directly. What would be maybe your advice to people who want to maybe become more of allies or want to be more
Yeah.
involved in the topic, but are not yet still, sure how to do it, what to do?
Yeah. Well, actually, I would suggest that they, first of all, just be courageous and get into action. Yeah, because what I really hope to convey is that don't be afraid to do also mistakes. Because it's not good to be inactive in relation to this topic, but just go out there and try to talk to people also without that are not within your bubble.
Mm,
Yeah, and to really move forward. And for that, it's a very small exercise, but what you could do is, for example, it's called a so-called circle of trust exercise. Yeah, just write down on a paper 3 or 4 people, maybe within your friend group or at work, that you trust the most, and then you put a filter on that in relation to how similar are they to you in regards of their gender, maybe their ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, and so forth. And if you
mm,
see, I mean, I guess mostly people see a rather high congruence there
mm,
in relation
mhm,
to themselves, to see, okay, maybe what perspectives are missing in my direct circle of trust, and then try to really actively get into touch with the perspectives of those maybe identities and perspectives missing. And this can be done, of course, via maybe watching movies addressing certain topics of minorities identities, or maybe just also reaching out there, going to some, let's say, talks or community meetings of these
mm.
groups. Yeah, so really reaching out and opening up the dialogue. This is what I would advise.
Nice. I will do that. Really good advice. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for sharing all of those insights. It was really interesting to talk to you. I still feel it's a big topic, but it's a really relevant one. So I'm happy that there are people like you who are, focusing on that and also helping us kind of externals to the topic who are still very involved, to also play our part.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for having me. And yeah, hope we see us again on the diversity journey very soon.
Yes. Thank you, Frauke.